Gaslighting. They'll convince you your memory is broken until their truth becomes yours. Gaslighting doesn't erase reality, it replaces it, slowly. It starts with gentle denial and ends with rewriting your entire sense of history. They'll say, "You're overreacting," when you finally stand up for yourself. They make you question the tone in their voice, even when it's cruel. One day you're certain of what you saw. The next, you feel uncertain for having seen it. They tell you that no one else would love you, that you're difficult, sensitive, dramatic. Gaslighters isolate you from people who affirm your experience. They'll hide things and say you lost them. They rewrite conversations, not because they forget, but because they want you to. Apologies become your instinct, even when you've done nothing wrong. They project their behavior onto you, accusing you of lying, cheating, manipulating. You begin to censor yourself, not out of fear, but confusion. The line between disagreement and delusion becomes blurred. They teach you that emotional reactions mean you're irrational. You start to believe your emotions are inconvenient, rather than human. Gaslighting flourishes in silence. The less you talk, the more they win. You defend them to friends who are concerned. You begin to think the pain is your fault, not their behavior. You second-guess every boundary you try to draw. You fear speaking up because your reality always gets twisted. You think, maybe I am the problem. That's the goal, eventually. You don't just trust them, you distrust yourself. Gaslighting is not just abuse of truth, it's abuse of memory. When they leave, the silence feels more believable than the truth ever did, and even when you're free, you'll still hear their voice, echoing inside your own. Guilt tripping. They weaponize your conscience to control your choices. Guilt becomes a leash that doesn't require force, only suggestion. They make you feel like your needs are harmful to others. You begin to apologize for prioritizing your peace. They'll say, "After everything I've done for you," and leave the rest unspoken. It's not about what you did. It's about how bad they can make you feel for doing it. You learn to fear disappointing them more than you fear neglecting yourself. They don't punish you directly. They just let the guilt eat you alive. You start changing your behavior not out of care but out of fear of hurting them. They call you selfish for choosing your own boundaries. They don't need to yell. A disappointed look is enough to bend your will. Eventually, pleasing them becomes a survival tactic. They twist your empathy into obedience. You find yourself making sacrifices you never agreed to. Your own needs begin to feel shameful. They'll bring up old favors like debts you never signed for. You begin to believe that love is something you earn by suffering. You stay in toxic situations to avoid feeling like the villain. Even your silence can be turned against you. So now you're just ignoring me? They cry when you speak up, and smile when you stay quiet. Your self-worth becomes tied to how little inconvenience you cause. Eventually, you stop asking for anything at all. You feel guilty for resting, for saying no, for existing outside their needs. You forget that guilt can be manufactured, and that real love doesn't demand it. You're not the selfish one. You're just finally choosing yourself. And that's what they fear most, a version of you they can't guilt into silence. Love bombing. They tell you you're everything they've ever wanted, before they even know who you are. They flood you with compliments, gifts, messages. You're different. You're perfect. It feels like being chosen, until it feels like being owned. Love bombing isn't love. It's control wearing perfume. They move fast, too fast for your instincts to catch up, too warm to feel threatening, too soon to question. And that's the trap. They mirror your wounds. They echo your dreams. They study your needs, not to meet them, but to make you dependent on the supply. You start to crave their validation like oxygen. And just when you're hooked, they pull away, cold, distant, unrecognizable. Suddenly you're begging for the version of them that made you feel alive. But that version was never real, just a mask. You wonder what changed. The answer? Nothing. The affection was bait. The withdrawal is punishment. Now you'll do anything to feel chosen again. It's not love, it's conditioning. A cycle of highs and lows that rewires your brain. Their praise becomes your reward, their silence, your sentence. You apologize when they hurt you. You work harder to earn their attention. You become addicted to hope. But love that rushes in just to pull the floor out was never love at all. Real love doesn't confuse your nervous system. It doesn't make you doubt your worth. So, if someone makes you feel like a fairy tale from day one, ask yourself, are you being loved or are you being hunted? Cultivating dependence. They make you feel like you can't live without them. But it didn't start that way. At first, they empower you, support you, say all the right things. You feel seen, safe, stronger with them by your side. Then slowly, they take pieces of your independence and call it love. They insist on handling your problems. They offer help before you ask. They become your decision maker. Then call you incapable when you want control back. You forget how to function without their voice in your head. Their presence becomes the cure to the illness they quietly created. They isolate you in soft ways. You don't need them, you have me. They replace your support system, one closeness at a time. You start to ask permission instead of speaking your mind. You shrink your world to fit inside their approval. You doubt your instincts. You second-guess your ideas. You wait for their input to validate your choices. You begin to need them, not because they're helpful, but because they've slowly made you believe you can't do life without them. That's not care. It's capture. Love doesn't demand dependence. It builds with interdependence, with choice, not control, with trust, not tethering. So when someone makes you feel like you're only strong when they're near, ask yourself, did they build you up or just clip your wings? Learned helplessness. They didn't break you all at once. They made you stop trying. Slowly. It starts with failure, a mistake, a punishment that felt unfair. Then it happens again and again, until you stop fighting, not because you're weak, but because you've been trained to believe that nothing will change. This is learned helplessness. And it's not just psychological, it becomes physical. You stop resisting what hurts you. You stop expecting kindness. You stop leaving, even when the door is wide open. Abusers use it carefully. They wear you down with inconsistency. Sometimes they're kind. Sometimes they're cruel. You never know which version will show up, so you stop reacting altogether. You become passive, quiet, tired in ways sleep can't fix. You begin to tell yourself, this is just how life is. You internalize their voice. I deserve this. I'm too much. I'm the problem. But you're not. You've just been conditioned. Like a dog that stops pulling on a leash that was never tight. Like a person who sees freedom and assumes it's a trick. You don't lack power. You've been taught not to use it. And the scariest part? You begin to accept the cage, because it feels safer than risking pain again. But deep down, you remember what it felt like to hope, to push back, to imagine more. That memory is your rebellion. Stockholm Syndrome. They hurt you, and you defend them. They isolate you, and you feel safe with them. They break you, and you thank them for staying. This is Stockholm Syndrome, the mind's survival response to emotional captivity. It doesn't happen overnight. It grows in the spaces between punishment and reward. They scare you, then soothe you, hurt you, then hold you. Your nervous system can't tell the difference between love and relief, so it bonds with the person who creates the fear, then relieves it. You start to see their approval as a prize, their anger as your fault, their presence as protection from the pain they caused. You rationalize their cruelty. They're just stressed. I know they care deep down. No one else understands me like they do. And so you stay. Not because you're blind, but because you've been taught to see pain as proof of love. The same rope they use to bind you becomes your comfort. In trauma, the mind will cling to anything that feels predictable, even a captor, even a lie. But love doesn't confuse your instincts. It doesn't hurt and heal in the same breath. It doesn't leave you apologizing for your own fear. If someone makes you feel safer in their chaos than in your own peace, it's not love. It's a bond built in captivity, and it can be broken. Memory manipulation. Memories are fragile, not because the past changes, but because the way we remember it can be rewritten. This is memory manipulation, not forgetting, but being taught to misremember. It doesn't always start with lies. Sometimes it starts with doubt. Are you sure that's how it happened? You always get things wrong. You're remembering it emotionally, not logically. Soon, your version of events feels exaggerated, skewed, too dramatic to be trusted. They rewrite the past slowly, changing details, tones, intentions. Suddenly, the argument you remember clearly was just a misunderstanding. The insult was a joke. The betrayal was your fault. And you start to believe it, because you want to be fair, because you're afraid of conflict, because you've been conditioned to see yourself as the unreliable narrator in your own story. They don't just lie, they edit. They revise moments until they sound better from their side, until you begin to wonder if your pain ever actually happened. And the scariest part? Once your memory becomes theirs, you stop trusting your emotions. You hesitate to speak up, because every time you do, the truth gets twisted until it looks like blame. Memory manipulation isn't about forgetting the past. It's about surrendering it. But your truth doesn't need permission to exist. It was real. It hurt. And no amount of rewriting can change the way it shaped you. Fear-mongering. Fear sharpens the mind, but in the wrong hands, it dulls your ability to think for yourself. This is fear-mongering. And it's quieter than you expect. It doesn't always look like panic. Sometimes it sounds like concern. Sometimes it sounds like love. Don't trust them. You'll fail without me. The world is dangerous. Stay close. They're all out to get you. At first, it sounds like protection, warnings, advice. But slowly, fear replaces logic. And you start shrinking your world to feel safe in theirs. You cancel plans, avoid people, second-guess opportunities. Not because you want to, but because they've taught you the cost of risk. They'll highlight dangers that don't exist, inflate threats, remind you of every failure, and make every mistake feel fatal. They don't want you confident. They want you cautious, dependent, scared. Because fear makes you predictable, and predictable people are easier to control. Fear-mongering isn't about keeping you safe, it's about keeping you small. Real care doesn't paralyze you, it empowers you. So if someone uses fear to guide your decisions, ask yourself, are they protecting you or protecting their grip on you? Fear sharpens the mind, but in the wrong hands, it dulls your ability to think for yourself. This is fear-mongering. And it's quieter than you expect. It doesn't always look like panic. Sometimes it sounds like concern. Sometimes it sounds like love. Don't trust them. You'll fail without me. The world is dangerous. Stay close. They're all out to get you. At first, it sounds like protection, warnings, advice. But slowly, fear replaces logic, and you start shrinking your world to feel safe in theirs. You cancel plans, avoid people, second-guess opportunities, not because you want to, but because they've taught you the cost of risk. They'll highlight dangers that don't exist, inflate threats, remind you of every failure, and make every mistake feel fatal. They don't want you confident. They want you cautious, dependent, scared, because fear makes you predictable, and predictable people are easier to control. Fear-mongering isn't about keeping you safe. It's about keeping you small. Real care doesn't paralyze you. It empowers you. So if someone uses fear to guide your decisions, ask yourself, are they protecting you or protecting their grip on you? Emotional blackmail. They won't raise their voice. They'll raise your guilt. This is emotional blackmail. Manipulation through obligation, shame, and fear of loss. They don't need to say, do this or else. They let the silence say it for them. If you loved me, you'd do this. After everything I've done for you, I guess I just mean less to you than they do. It's never a direct threat. It's a quiet blade dipped in disappointment. You find yourself walking on eggshells, not because you're afraid of violence, but because you're terrified of letting them down. They make their pain your responsibility, their emotions your fault, their sadness your burden to fix. And if you don't comply, they sulk, withdraw, make you feel like the villain in your own story. You apologize when you're not wrong. You give when you're empty. You stay silent to keep the peace, even as it costs your sanity. You confuse guilt with loyalty, sacrifice with love, suffering with proof that you care enough. But real love doesn't hold you hostage. It doesn't punish your boundaries. It doesn't demand your silence to feel secure. If someone needs you to feel bad so they can feel powerful, that's not love. That's leverage. Emotional blackmail thrives in people-pleasers, in kindness, in empathy. It's not your weakness, it's their weapon. And you can choose to put it down. Playing on insecurities. They learn what you hate about yourself, and then they use it. Not all wounds are created by enemies. Some are pressed by the people who say they care. This is playing on insecurities, the manipulation of self-doubt for control. They notice what makes you flinch, the way your voice shakes when you speak, the glance you give the mirror, the silence when certain topics come up. And then, they store it, not to comfort you, but to pull it out when you stop being easy to control. You're being sensitive like always. No one else would put up with your issues. Why are you acting like you're better than you are? They don't insult you directly. They nudge your wounds. They laugh when you open up. They question your abilities in subtle ways. You shrink, not because they told you to, but because they made you believe you were too much or not enough. They make you insecure about your strength, about your kindness, about the very things that make you, you. And the worst part? You start to criticize yourself for even noticing. You think, maybe they're right. Maybe I do overthink. Maybe I am lucky to be tolerated. But you're not too much. And you're not lucky to be accepted. You are already enough. They just needed you to forget that. People who love you will protect your insecurities. People who need to control you will weaponize them. So if they keep reminding you of your flaws, they were never trying to help you heal. They were trying to make you easier to hold. Triangulation. They don't fight with you directly. They bring someone else in and let the comparison do the damage. This is triangulation, manipulation through third parties, where control is disguised as perspective. They say things like, "Even they think you're overreacting. My ex never made things this difficult. Everyone else agrees with me. Why can't you?" And suddenly you're not just defending your feelings, you're defending your reality. They use others, real or imagined, to corner you, to isolate you, to make you feel like the outsider in your own relationship. It's never just you and them. It's always you, them, and a shadow hanging over your worth. Sometimes it's an ex, sometimes a friend, sometimes a parent, a coworker, even a stranger they invent. They place you in silent competition, and they hold the scoreboard. You start changing how you speak, how you look, how you behave, not because it feels right, but because you want to win back their validation. You feel jealous, paranoid, insecure, and they stay calm, watching you spiral. That's the goal, because if you're busy comparing yourself, you're not questioning them. Real love doesn't pit people against each other. It doesn't pull in outsiders to prove a point. It doesn't make you feel like you're fighting for a place in someone's life. Triangulation creates confusion, but confusion isn't clarity, and you are not meant to be measured against anyone else. Public shaming. They don't need to scream at you in private when they can humiliate you in public. This is public shaming, a form of control that weaponizes your image against you. It starts subtly. A joke at your expense. A backhanded compliment in front of friends. An honest truth that didn't need to be said out loud. You laugh because you don't want to seem sensitive. You nod because calling it out would ruin the vibe. But inside, you wilt, because you weren't just embarrassed, you were exposed. Not to be understood, but to be undermined. They make you feel small where others can see it, so your silence becomes their stage. You're always like this. They don't mind. They know it's just a joke. Relax, you're being dramatic. But the joke only ever goes one way, and somehow you never get to be in on it. They'll raise your mistakes in rooms that echo. They'll share your insecurities like anecdotes. They'll paint your pain as personality, and then stand back as the crowd laughs. Why? Because public shame isolates. It teaches you that speaking up leads to more humiliation, that being quiet keeps the peace, that your dignity is negotiable. But real connection doesn't cost your self-respect. Real love doesn't laugh at your scars. It doesn't shrink you in front of others to feel bigger beside you. Shame was never meant to be a spotlight, and you were never meant to be the show. Hoovering. They disappear, then return with just enough sweetness to make you forget the damage. This is hoovering, a manipulation tactic named after a vacuum. Because they suck you back in the moment you try to breathe without them. It starts when you pull away. When you finally draw a boundary. When you begin to reclaim space. Suddenly they change. Now they're kind. They remember your favorite things. They apologize, not with depth, but with convenience. They say, "I miss us. No one understands me like you do. You're the best thing that ever happened to me." And for a second it feels real. You start to doubt your reasons for leaving. You question the pain they caused. You wonder if they've truly changed. But hoovering isn't about change. It's about access. They don't miss you. They miss the control. They miss the comfort of your forgiveness. They miss the version of you that stayed quiet and kept coming back. So they make you feel special again, just long enough to reset the cycle. You let them in. They behave, for a while. Then slowly, the same patterns return. Because their kindness wasn't healing, it was bait. Real apologies come with accountability. Real change is consistent, even when no one's watching. Hoovering is neither. It's not love. It's a trap wrapped in nostalgia. You're not hard to love. You're just easy to manipulate when your heart still hopes for a version of them that never truly existed. Cognitive dissonance. You feel two things at once, and both can't be true. But you try to believe them anyway. This is cognitive dissonance, the mental war between what you know and what you want to believe. You know they lied, but you also believe they love you. You know they hurt you, but you still trust they didn't mean to. And the gap between those truths starts to tear you in two. You tell yourself, they're just stressed. They had a rough childhood. They didn't mean it like that. Because it's easier to justify the pain than to admit you're in it. You rewrite your own story, not out of delusion, but out of self-preservation. If you accept that someone you love is hurting you, what does that say about them? About you? About everything you thought was real? So you suppress the facts to protect the feeling. But dissonance doesn't die quietly. It eats at your sleep. It clouds your peace. It turns your mind into a courtroom where both sides are always losing. You're not crazy. You're just split, torn between your logic and your longing, between your fear and your hope. But truth doesn't need you to be ready. It waits. It returns. It whispers through the cracks in your stories. And when you're ready, the version of you that stopped pretending will finally breathe. Exploiting mirror neurons. You flinch when someone else gets hurt. You smile when someone else laughs. Your brain copies, even when it doesn't mean to. This is the power of mirror neurons. And some people know exactly how to use them against you. They mirror your tone, your body language, your values, your pain. Not to connect, but to manipulate. They study you, reflect your emotions back at you, make you feel understood, safe, aligned. You think, we're so alike. They just get me. We're on the same wavelength. But it's a trick, because what they're showing you isn't who they are, it's who you are. They don't offer their identity, they borrow yours. And once you trust them, they shift. They start shaping how you feel. Their anger becomes your guilt. Their sadness becomes your responsibility. Their silence becomes your punishment. You empathize deeply because that's what mirror neurons are built to do. But empathy without awareness is a loaded weapon pointed at your peace. Not everyone who understands your emotions has good intentions. Some just want access. And the best way to access you is to become you. But you don't owe your energy to every echo of yourself. Real connection is mutual, not manipulated. Exploiting empathy. They don't overpower you, they outfeel you. This is exploiting empathy. Not through force, but through emotion. They cry when you confront them. They break down when you hold them accountable. They tell you their trauma when you set a boundary. And suddenly, you're not allowed to be hurt. Because they're hurting more. You feel bad for being upset, guilty for needing space, ashamed for saying no. They twist your kindness into compliance. They make you responsible for their reactions. They don't demand. They bleed until you hand over your peace. You tell yourself, they're not well. They just need support. I don't want to make things worse. But they never ask how you're doing, never notice your silence, never hold space for your ache. Because your empathy isn't something they respect, it's something they use. They know you care, so they don't have to. You forgive when you shouldn't. You give more than you have. You abandon your own needs just to stop their pain. But real pain doesn't need to control. Real healing doesn't silence yours to make space for theirs. Empathy isn't weakness, but it can be used against you by those who never learned how to sit with their own discomfort. You don't need to stop caring. You just need to stop letting care be your cage. Creating a sense of obligation. They don't control you with threats, they control you with favors. This is creating a sense of obligation. A subtle tactic where kindness is currency and the debt is emotional. They go out of their way to help you. They do something nice, unexpected, unasked for, and then they wait, not for gratitude, but for leverage. You know I always support you. After everything I've done for you, I just thought you'd do the same. And suddenly, you feel guilty for saying no, guilty for setting a boundary, guilty for doing anything that doesn't serve them, because the favor was never free. It was a loan with interest. You begin to sacrifice your peace to repay a debt you never agreed to. You say yes when your whole body says no. You bend so they won't break. You convince yourself it's love, that it's loyalty, that this is just what good people do. But healthy giving doesn't demand repayment, it doesn't track your responses, it doesn't build invisible ledgers between every moment of care. You don't owe someone your time, energy, or silence just because they gave you theirs with strings attached. Manipulation doesn't always wear a mask. Sometimes it shows up with a smile, a favor, and a guilt trip disguised as generosity. Divide and conquer tactics. They don't need to fight you. If they can turn you against everyone else. This is divide and conquer, a strategy where isolation isn't obvious, it's orchestrated. They start by planting seeds. They talk about you behind your back. You can't trust them like you trust me. They're jealous. That's why they act like that. One by one, you begin to pull away. From friends, family, anyone who might give you clarity. And in the silence they create, their voice becomes the only one you hear. You begin to believe. They're the only one who truly understands me. They've always been right about people. Maybe I've just outgrown everyone else. But what's really happened is that your support system has been disassembled piece by piece. You stop sharing things with others. You stop asking questions. You stop noticing how small your world has become. Because when they divide you, they can control you. With no one left to challenge their version of reality, their words become law. This tactic doesn't always look hostile. Sometimes it's dressed as concern, as loyalty, as just being honest. But ask yourself, why does their love cost your community? Why does their closeness require your isolation? Control thrives in silence. And when they've made sure you're the only one in the room, you'll finally hear them clearly, but no one else will be there to say you're not crazy. Authority bias? You question yourself, but you don't question them. Why? Because they sound like they know what they're talking about. This is authority bias, the tendency to believe someone just because they appear powerful, experienced, or important. They speak with confidence. They wear the right clothes. They use the right words. They carry themselves like they can't be wrong. And so you believe them. Even when your gut says otherwise, even when something doesn't add up, you ignore your instincts because you assume they must know better. They're older, smarter, more successful. They act like they've done this before, and maybe they have, but not in the way you think, because authority is easy to fake. All it takes is posture, tone, and a little pressure. They say, "This is how it's always done." You wouldn't understand. "You should trust me. I've been doing this for years." And slowly, you stop trusting yourself. You follow their lead. You silence your doubts. You hand over your choices in exchange for their certainty. But confidence isn't truth. Status isn't wisdom, and control dressed in professionalism is still control. Authority bias works best on those who don't realize they're experts of their own lives. You don't need a title to know when something feels wrong. Your gut is louder than their resume. Scapegoating. Someone has to be the problem, and they make sure it's always you. This is scapegoating, the act of projecting blame onto one person so the system stays intact and the illusion of harmony remains untouched. They blame you for the mood in the room, for the silence at dinner, for the argument that started with their voice, but somehow ends with your apology. Every mistake becomes yours, every fault a reflection of your flaws, and when things go wrong, they don't look in the mirror, they look at you. You begin to internalize it, to carry guilt that doesn't belong to you, to apologize for things you didn't do just to keep the peace. You hear, "Why do you always ruin things? Everything was fine until you showed up. See what you made me do?" And it gets harder to tell where their emotions end and your responsibility begins. You start to shrink. You filter your words. You become hyper-aware of everyone's moods and blame yourself for all of them. Scapegoating doesn't just wound your self-worth, it reshapes it. Because when enough people treat you like the problem, you start to believe you are one. But their chaos isn't your burden. Their dysfunction isn't your fault. And healing begins when you stop carrying what they refuse to face. Social proof exploitation. Darkest psychology tricks to fall asleep to. You look around, and everyone else seems to be okay with it. So maybe it's not that bad, right? This is social proof exploitation, when they use the crowd to quiet your intuition. They surround themselves with enablers, people who laugh at their jokes, co-sign their opinions, downplay their behavior, and suddenly you're the only one who seems uncomfortable. You start thinking, maybe I'm being dramatic. Everyone else seems fine. Why can't I be? I don't want to be the difficult one. But what you're really feeling is the pressure to conform, not the truth of the situation. They use groupthink like a shield, a buffer between their actions and your response. If everyone approves, then your discomfort must be wrong, must be weakness, must be you. So, you stay quiet. You nod along. You blend in. And every time you ignore your inner voice, it gets a little quieter, a little easier to dismiss. That's the trick. They don't need to convince you. They just need the room to outnumber you. But popular doesn't mean moral. Normal doesn't mean safe. And the louder the group gets, the more important it is to listen to the whisper inside you. You don't need permission to feel what you feel, and you don't need the room to agree before you walk out of it. Groupthink induction. When the group speaks, you stay silent. Not because you agree, but because disagreeing feels dangerous. This is groupthink induction, a psychological fog where harmony is forced and independent thought becomes a threat. They say things like, "We're all on the same page. Everyone agrees, don't overcomplicate it. You don't want to slow us down, do you?" And slowly, you feel the pressure to nod along, to smile, to blend, to be easy. You stop asking questions. You let go of doubt. You trade clarity for comfort, because friction feels unsafe. You start to believe the consensus is your opinion, even when it isn't. Groupthink isn't about connection. It's about control. It rewards agreement and punishes difference. In time, you forget how to trust your own voice. You mistake silence for wisdom. You confuse obedience with peace. But the group isn't always right, and the majority isn't always moral. Real unity makes space for dissent. Real belonging welcomes discomfort. If the room can't hold your truth, maybe it's not a room worth staying in. Cultivating a false identity. They don't tell you who you are, they just slowly make you forget. This is cultivating a false identity, a manipulation where your reflection becomes theirs. They praise the parts of you they can control. They shame the parts that resist. Over time, you adapt, not to survive, but to be accepted. You stop dressing the way you like, stop laughing as loud, stop speaking your mind. Little shifts, so subtle they feel like growth. But it's not growth, it's distortion. You become easier to love, but only on their terms. They say, "You're better now. You've changed, in a good way. You're finally becoming who you're meant to be." And maybe you believe them, because being chosen feels safer than being authentic. But what you've become is a version of yourself that fits their script, not your story. You laugh at things you don't find funny. You hide parts of your past. You filter your feelings until even you don't know what they are anymore. They don't need to erase you, just edit you. And one day, you look in the mirror and don't recognize who's looking back. The scariest kind of control is the one that feels like love. But real love doesn't require reinvention. It sees you and lets you see yourself too. The seeds of self-doubt. They don't need to break you, just make you question yourself. This is planting the seeds of self-doubt, a slow erosion of confidence disguised as concern, as honesty, as just being real with you. They say, "Are you sure that's a good idea? You're really sensitive, you know? Don't take this the wrong way, but..." And just like that, a crack forms. Not big, just enough. You start checking your words before you speak. You second-guess every decision. You shrink, not because you're small, but because they've convinced you growth is dangerous. They frame your strengths as flaws. Assertiveness becomes aggression. Passion becomes instability. Boundaries become selfishness. You think, maybe I'm overreacting. Maybe they're right. Maybe I really am the problem. You become your own critic before they get the chance to be. That's the trick. They don't need to say it twice, just once, with enough weight, and you'll do the rest of the work for them. Self-doubt doesn't scream, it whispers. And once it's in your head, it echoes in your own voice. But you weren't born unsure. That was taught. And what's been planted can also be uprooted. Emotional contagion exploitation. You feel anxious, but it's not yours. You feel guilt, but you didn't do anything wrong. This is emotional contagion exploitation, the weaponization of mood, used to control rooms, relationships, and you. They don't say they're angry. They just act like they are until you change your behavior to soothe them. They sigh, they slam a door, they go quiet. And now you're walking on eggshells over emotions they never owned. You learn to scan their face before you speak. You match their mood, even when it swallows your own. And they love that, because they don't need to ask you to adapt. You just do. They use your emotional sensitivity as a tool to shut you down, to get what they want, to make you responsible for feelings that were never yours to carry. You apologize for upsetting them when they never told you they were upset. You soothe them even when they're the one who hurt you. And worst of all, you believe this means you're empathetic, but this isn't empathy. It's survival. You're not reading the room, you're bracing for impact. True emotional safety isn't built on guessing. It's built on openness, clarity, shared responsibility. You can feel with others without drowning in them. You're allowed to keep your emotions separate from the storm they never learned to manage. The illusion of choice. They say, it's up to you. But somehow, there's only one answer that won't cost you. This is the illusion of choice, where freedom is presented, but control hides underneath. You're given two options, one that pleases them, one that brings discomfort, guilt, or withdrawal. You can say no, but you already know what happens if you do. They'll go cold, go silent, punish you without words. So you choose what they wanted all along and call it your own decision. That's the illusion. They say, you don't have to. I just thought you cared. It's fine. Do whatever makes you happy. I'm not mad, just disappointed. It sounds harmless, but it's loaded. And now your choices aren't really choices. They're emotional traps. Over time, you stop hesitating. You stop weighing what you want. You just pick whatever keeps the peace, until peace becomes more important than truth, more important than yourself. This tactic is powerful because it doesn't look like control. It looks like love, like compromise, like care. But real choice doesn't come with a price tag. It doesn't punish honesty or reward obedience. Real choice feels safe, not strategic. And the moment you feel like you have to say yes just to avoid fallout, you're not choosing, you're surviving. Anchoring effect. They say a number, a time, a standard, and suddenly everything else feels small in comparison. This is the anchoring effect, a cognitive bias where the first detail you're given becomes the reference point for every decision after. They ask for too much, so you feel like you're negotiating when they take a little less. They set the tone early, high expectations, unrealistic demands, emotional intensity. And now anything less feels like kindness. But it isn't. It's just less cruel than what you got used to. You stay in places that hurt because the pain no longer surprises you. You accept crumbs because they once starved you. That's how anchoring works. They shift your baseline. So normal becomes toxic, and bare minimum feels generous. They offer you chaos, so you'll be grateful for silence. They give you silence, so you'll beg for attention. They drip-feed you affection and call it love, and you believe it because what you once needed has been rewritten by what you've survived. Anchoring isn't about numbers. It's about lowering your standards so you don't even realize you're settling. But safety shouldn't feel like a reward, and love shouldn't feel like a break from being hurt. You deserve more than what you've been taught to tolerate. Framing effect manipulation. The facts don't change, just the way they're told. This is framing effect manipulation, a psychological trick where how something is presented shapes how you feel about it. They don't lie, they just reword the truth until it serves them. They say, I was just protecting you, instead of admitting they hid something. You always twist my words, instead of owning what they said. It's not cheating. We were on a break. The story shifts, not to reflect reality, but to redirect blame. And the more they do it, the more you stop trusting your gut, because now you're not arguing facts. You're arguing interpretation. You start to wonder, am I being unfair? Too emotional? Did I take it the wrong way? And while you're tangled in self-doubt, they stay calm, collected, reasonable. That's the trick. They control the frame, and the frame controls the meaning. Soon, you're not sure what happened, only how they made you feel about it. But truth isn't about spin. It doesn't need angles, edits, or excuses. If their version only makes sense when it's dressed up, maybe it's not the truth, just a mask. And no matter how clever the frame, reality still lives beyond it. Confirmation bias reinforcement. Once they tell you what to believe, they'll only show you the proof that fits. This is confirmation bias reinforcement, a subtle manipulation where they shape your worldview by feeding you only what confirms it. They say, "See, you always overreact," and only mention the moments you struggled, never the times you stayed calm. They say, "You never listen," and then ignore the 100 times you did. Every flaw they name, they frame with cherry-picked evidence, while all your goodness is left out of view. Over time, you start repeating their words in your own head. "I guess I do ruin everything. I probably am too much. No wonder no one else puts up with me." You become the prosecutor, the jury, and the punishment, all by design. Because the more you believe their story, the less you trust your own. And when your memory becomes a highlight reel of only your worst moments, you stop seeing the whole picture. That's the danger of this trick. It doesn't come from nowhere. It grows in the cracks of your own insecurity, and they know exactly where to water it. But your worth isn't made of selected memories. You are not the sum of your worst days. You can question the story they've told without erasing your past. You can unlearn their version and remember who you were before their voice got louder than yours. The Baader-Meinhof phenomenon. You hear about something once, and then suddenly you see it everywhere. This is the Baader-Meinhof phenomenon, also known as frequency illusion. But when used with intent, it becomes a psychological trap. They plant an idea, just once. A worry, a rumor, a judgment. You've always had trouble with commitment. People say you come off a bit cold. You don't notice how rude you sound, do you? And suddenly, you start seeing signs of it in everything you do. You hesitate before texting, reread your tone, overanalyze every interaction. Not because it's true, but because your mind is now primed to notice it. They don't have to repeat it. You'll do that for them, because now you're looking for proof, and the brain always finds what it searches for. That's how this works. One planted idea becomes a pattern you think is real. A label you begin to wear, a mirror you didn't build but start to believe reflects who you are. But seeing something more doesn't make it truth. It makes it familiar. And familiarity isn't proof, it's repetition. When someone introduces you to a fear, be careful not to mistake the echo for evidence. Mirroring and matching. They sit how you sit. They speak how you speak. You think it's chemistry, but it's choreography. Mirroring is mimicry in disguise. They copy your posture, your words, even your breathing, and you feel understood because they reflect you back to yourself. It starts with shared interests. You both like the same music, same movies, same moral codes. But it's not coincidence. It's calibration. You laugh, they laugh louder. You frown, they frown faster. And every time they echo your rhythm, your guard drops a little more. You call it a connection. They call it a strategy. You tell them something vulnerable, and they say, "Me too." But they weren't opening up, they were opening you. You find yourself trusting them. Because how could someone who feels so familiar be harmful? That's the trap. They make themselves into your mirror, so that when they finally change, you blame your own reflection. They'll agree with your dreams until they slowly steer them. They'll nod through your pain until you think it's their own, but it never was. Mirroring builds intimacy fast, but what grows quickly also collapses just as fast. And when they disappear, you don't just lose them, you lose the version of yourself they created. Pacing and leading. They don't control you with force, they guide you with rhythm, step by step, until you're following without knowing. Pacing and leading is subtle. It starts with agreement, tiny nods, shared language, common ground. They speak your thoughts before you say them, and you feel heard, seen, safe. You trust them because they're just like you. And then, the shift. They start suggesting ideas that weren't yours, decisions you didn't plan. But by then, you've already been paced. And now, you're being led. They say what you're feeling, then add what they want you to feel next. I know this is hard. That's why I think you should. You're exhausted. That's why this would help. You're overwhelmed. That's why trusting me is easier. It's hypnotic, because it never feels like pressure. It feels like flow. But it's not your current, it's theirs. And now you're drifting further from your own thoughts. By the time you realize it, you've agreed to things you never questioned, made choices that weren't your own, and handed over trust that wasn't earned, just mirrored. That's the power of pacing and leading. You don't feel pushed, you feel understood. Until you're walking a path they wrote in your name. Neuro-linguistic programming. They don't need to break you. They just need to rewire the language in your mind. Neuro-linguistic programming. NLP. A method of using words, tone, and patterns to sneak past logic and speak directly to your subconscious. They use soft language, repetition, embedded commands. They don't say, "Trust me." They say, and as you continue to feel safe, you'll find that trusting becomes easier. Subtle, slippery, unnoticed. They use your name often. To pull your attention inward. They mirror your posture. To build silent rapport. They match your breathing, until it feels like you're in sync. But the goal isn't connection, it's compliance. They ask questions with only one answer. They frame choices so you feel in control, even when the outcome was always theirs. You say yes, without knowing why. Because you weren't being convinced. You were being conditioned. NLP is not about truth. It's about rhythm, cues, patterns, and once they learn your patterns, they write their own script over yours. Not with threats, not with pain, but with carefully chosen words you never realized were rearranging your mind. Subliminal messaging. You didn't notice it, but it noticed you. Subliminal messaging hides beneath awareness, a flash, a whisper, a color shift, a word buried in music. You think you're watching a video, but your subconscious is watching something else. They don't need your permission. They don't ask for attention. They slide in unnoticed. Because the mind absorbs what the eyes don't fully see. It might be a single frame, a flicker of a word like obey, a sound too faint to hear, but loud enough to steer. Your brain picks it up, not with thought, with feeling. You feel anxious, but don't know why. You feel drawn to something, but can't explain it. You make choices that feel random, but they were rehearsed for you. Advertisers use it. Cult leaders master it. Propaganda lives by it. Because influence is stronger when you don't know you're being influenced. You never questioned the choice, because you never noticed the cue. And that's the trick. Subliminal messages don't speak louder, they speak underneath, where you're most open and least protected. Priming effect. They don't change your mind. They change what your mind is ready to see. Priming is preparation, disguised as coincidence. It's when a single word, a smell, an image shifts how you think without asking. You read the word cold, and suddenly you view others as distant. You see a smile before a question, and you're more likely to say yes. It doesn't persuade, it positions. You think you're making a choice, but your brain was already nudged. They fill the room with a certain color, use words that trigger old emotions, ask you to recall a time you felt safe, then sell you the idea that safety depends on them. You don't even feel it happening. Priming bypasses thought. It gets into your expectations, and once those are set, Everything after feels like your own decision, but it wasn't. You weren't guided, you were prepared. Prepared to think a certain way, feel a certain thing, say yes to something you never meant to say yes to. Priming doesn't push, it plants and waits. Suggestive language and hypnosis. They don't force you to obey. They make you think it was your idea. Suggestive language doesn't command, it whispers. It bypasses your logic, slipping into your subconscious like water finding cracks in stone. They use patterns, cadence, phrases that feel soft but sink deep. Not, "you should relax," but, "as you begin to relax, you might notice how easy it is to let go." The command hides inside the cushion, and your mind accepts it, not because it's convinced, but because it was invited. This is the root of hypnosis, not spinning wheels and swinging watches, but repetition, imagery, rituals of rhythm that lull the brain into openness. They'll lower their voice when they want you to listen closer. They'll repeat your name to create intimacy. They'll anchor emotions to phrases so that the words alone bring back the feeling. It's not magic, it's technique, and the scariest part? Once it's embedded, you won't remember the moment it happened, only the outcome. You changed your mind without knowing who placed the thought there. Because suggestive language doesn't demand obedience. It creates agreement that feels like your own. Creating a sense of urgency. Time is a pressure point. Push it, and people stop thinking. They start reacting. Urgency is the illusion of time running out. The clock is ticking. The deal is ending. The door is closing. They want you to panic, but not visibly. Just enough to skip the pause where your reason usually lives. Suddenly, "think about it" becomes "act now." You feel it in your chest. A quiet pressure telling you, if you wait, you'll lose. But lose what? They never say clearly, because clarity calms, and urgency thrives in fog. You start imagining worst-case scenarios. What if someone else gets it? What if I miss out? What if I regret not saying yes? And just like that, you agree. Not out of desire, but out of fear. This tactic is old. Marketers use it. Manipulators master it. Abusers weaponize it. The countdown doesn't mean danger. It means distraction. Urgency makes the mind narrow, until the only option left is the one they wanted all along. It's not about speed. It's about shutting the door before your doubt walks in. Foot in the door technique. They don't start with a storm. They start with a breeze. The foot in the door technique is quiet. A small request, a harmless favor, a "can you help me with just this?" You say yes, because it feels polite, easy, reasonable. And that's the point. It opens a crack. Later comes a bigger ask, a heavier demand, a change that makes you pause, but you've already said yes before. To say no now would mean rethinking the version of you that agreed to help in the first place. You're not being asked, you're being escalated. They don't build trust, they build compliance, one step at a time. By the time they ask for everything, you've already given something, and your brain wants to stay consistent, even if the situation no longer feels right. That first yes wasn't about the favor, it was about access. Because once your door is open, they're already halfway in. Door in the face technique. They don't want the moon. They just ask for it first, so the stars seem like a bargain. The door in the face technique begins with something outrageous, a request so big your first instinct is to recoil. "Can I borrow £1,000? Will you commit every weekend?" "Can you quit your job for this?" You say, "No, of course you do." And that's exactly what they want. Because now, when they ask for something smaller, something they actually wanted all along, you're more likely to say yes. You feel relieved, grateful even, like you've been spared. It's a psychological trap. The second ask feels reasonable only because the first one didn't. You've been reset. Your internal scale of normal has shifted. What felt big now feels modest. What once required thought now gets a reflexive nod. And here's the twist. You feel generous, like you're meeting them halfway, like you chose this. But you didn't. They aimed high, so your refusal would soften the ground for the real seed they were planting. Because when the first door slams in your face, you open the second one yourself. Lowballing. They offer you gold, then hand you gravel. Lowballing starts with a deal that feels too good to pass up. A low price. A light commitment. A promise that sounds like kindness. You agree, you commit. You start to feel invested. And then, the details change. The price increases, the effort doubles, the terms tighten. But you stay. Not because it still makes sense, but because walking away now would mean admitting you were fooled. You tell yourself, "I've already come this far, I'll just stick it out. It's not that bad." And that's the trap. They never wanted to offer less. They just knew you wouldn't say yes to the truth up front. So they sold you the version you'd accept. Then unwrapped the version they always intended. And by then, you weren't making a new choice. You were justifying the old one. Lowballing doesn't rely on deception. It relies on commitment. On your need to stay consistent even as the ground shifts beneath you. Because once your foot is in the mud, they know you'll try to walk it off instead of turning back. Bandwagon effect manipulation. They don't convince you it's right. They convince you it's popular. The bandwagon effect doesn't argue. It echoes, louder and louder, until silence feels like defiance. You don't want to be left out. So you scroll. You like, you follow. They don't sell you truth. They sell you majority. This many people can't be wrong. So maybe you are. Maybe your doubts are just noise. Maybe your hesitation is a flaw. You start to conform, not because it feels right, but because it feels safer. They fill the room with agreement. They flood the feed with repetition. They make the minority feel invisible, or worse, foolish. And soon, you stop asking questions, not out of belief, but out of exhaustion. You weren't outnumbered, you were outplayed. Bandwagon manipulation isn't about facts. It's about making you forget that truth doesn't require a crowd. Creating a sense of scarcity. They don't increase value, they limit access. Scarcity tricks the brain into urgency, not because something is better, but because it might vanish. Only 3 left. Offer ends tonight. One-time chance. And suddenly, it's not about wanting the thing, it's about not losing it. You rush. You decide fast. You override logic with fear. Fear of missing out. Fear of regret. Fear of being too late. But scarcity is often manufactured. A lie of limitation. Because if you believe it's rare, you'll treat it like treasure. They make rejection feel like loss. They make silence feel like distance. They make their time feel like a reward you're not guaranteed. People become prizes. Ideas become property. Time becomes leverage. It's never about what you're buying. It's about what you think you'll never find again. Scarcity manipulates not your desire, but your fear of not having. And when fear speaks louder than thought, you'll grab at anything just to keep from feeling empty. Exploiting the need for closure. The mind craves endings, and they use that craving to keep you trapped in a loop. Closure is supposed to bring peace, but when someone controls it, withholds it, twists it, it becomes a weapon. They vanish mid-argument, leave questions unanswered, apologies unfinished, stories incomplete. And so your mind replays it, over and over, because the brain wants patterns, explanations, an ending to fold the chaos into something tidy, but they never let you have it. They keep you chasing the last word, the final truth, the why that never comes. Because if you're still looking for closure, you're still engaged, still tethered, still hoping. You'll write their excuses for them. You'll imagine their regrets. You'll stay emotionally present long after they've left the room. And that's exactly what they want. No ending means no escape, no peace, no healing. Just a spinning wheel of what if and what did I do wrong? They don't need to hurt you again. They just need to leave the wound open. Micro-manipulation. They don't yell. They whisper. Micro-manipulation isn't loud. It's quiet enough to deny, but sharp enough to cut. A subtle glance of disapproval, a joke with teeth, a delayed reply that makes you question your worth. You bring it up and they say, "You're imagining things. You're too sensitive. It was just a joke." And so you shrink, not because the harm is massive, but because it's frequent, constant. Precision strikes aimed at your confidence. They pull away affection for one day, then flood you with praise the next. They change their tone mid-sentence. Praise you with one word, criticize with another. The message is never direct. It's felt, not heard. So you begin to walk, lighter, speak, softer. Doubt yourself more than you doubt them. That's how it works. Small manipulations, tiny shifts, adjustments to your behavior until you're no longer sure which parts of you are real and which were shaped to survive them. And when you finally crumble, they'll say, "You're overreacting. I didn't do anything." But they did. 1,000 nothings that added up to everything. The Zeigarnik effect. The unfinished haunts louder than the complete. And they know that. The Zeigarnik effect is your mind's obsession with things left open, tasks uncompleted, stories with no ending. It's why you remember what's undone more than what's been resolved. They'll start something, a confession, a compliment, a crisis, then leave it hanging in midair. You wait, you chase, you replay. You can't help it. Your mind loops around the gap, trying to seal it, trying to understand. But they never meant to finish. That wasn't the point. The point was to occupy space in your thoughts long after the moment ended. They leave you on read. They pause in the middle of saying something meaningful. They hold eye contact, but never follow through. They begin storms and walk away before the rain hits. And you become the one holding the weight, carrying the tension, writing endings that never arrive. Because the Zeigarnik effect doesn't care about truth, it just wants resolution. And they've weaponized that craving to keep you from ever resting. The Pygmalion effect. Expectation is a sculptor, and you are the clay. The Pygmalion effect says this: what others believe about you shapes what you believe about yourself. They treat you like you're incompetent, and soon you hesitate. They act like you're brilliant, and suddenly you rise to meet it. But here's where it turns dark. They lower the bar on purpose, tell you you're fragile, tell you you're weak, tell you you're lucky to be chosen at all. You begin shrinking to fit their frame, and the worst part, you start proving them right. You stumble where you used to walk. You question what you once knew, because belief, repeated enough, becomes behavior. This isn't praise or critique. It's programming, and once your identity bends to their expectation, they own the version of you that exists. They shaped it. They defined it. They framed your potential to match their control, not because it's true, but because they expected it loud enough for you to believe it yourself. Reframing failure. You didn't fail. You learned. That's what they'll tell you. But reframing failure isn't always a kindness. Sometimes it's control disguised as optimism. They'll take your pain and rename it. They'll take your setbacks and call them growth. They'll say, "This was meant to happen." Everything happens for a reason. But what if the reason is that they made you stumble? What if the lesson was never yours to learn, but theirs to teach, over and over, until you stopped questioning the pain? They reframe failure to make you compliant, to make you grateful for what broke you, to turn mistreatment into destiny and suffering into some sacred rite of passage. You failed? No. You grew. You hurt? No. You healed? You cried? No. You transformed. And in that twisting of truth, they rob you of the right to call a wound a wound. You're left smiling through bruises, thanking the hand that pushed you, telling yourself, maybe this was good for me. But not every fire purifies. Some just burn. The halo effect. We don't fall for people. We fall for fragments. The halo effect clouds the mind with a single glow. One trait so bright it blinds you to the rest. They're charming, so you think they must be kind. They're attractive, so you believe they must be honest. They're successful, so you assume they're good. And just like that, flaws vanish under the shine. You overlook red flags because their smile is warm. You excuse sharp words because their voice is soft. You rationalize their behavior because they once held the door for someone. This isn't about who they are. It's about what you projected. The halo blinds you, not because you can't see, but because you don't want to. They let you fill in the blanks. You write their story for them. You forgive too soon, trust too easily, stay too long. Because you weren't loving the person, you were loving the light. And sometimes, by the time the halo fades, you've already been scorched. Time constraints. They rush you, not because it's urgent, but because panic is easier to manipulate than peace. Time constraints are psychological pressure cookers. Decide now. Offer ends in 10 minutes. Don't think. Act. They force you to shrink your thinking, to silence your intuition, to sacrifice clarity for speed. You're not just making a decision. You're trying to escape discomfort. And that's the trick. The less time you feel, the less choice you truly have. They know that urgency narrows your focus. You zoom in on the surface and forget to look underneath. What sounds like opportunity might be manipulation. What looks like scarcity might be artificial. What feels like a choice might be a trap. They want your yes before your brain catches up. They don't want contemplation. They want instinct. Rushed, reactive, regretful. Because time isn't just money, it's control. And the one who controls the clock often controls the outcome. The contrast principle. Nothing is too much until you've seen worse first. The contrast principle doesn't change the truth, it changes what you compare it to. They'll show you the nightmare so the bad dream feels gentle. They'll raise the volume to 10, then drop it to 7 and call it peace. You're not choosing what's right, you're choosing what feels better than before. They overwhelm you, then offer you relief, but only the kind they control. You start to think, it's not so bad now, because your frame of reference has been carefully manipulated. They'll present extremes, ugly ones, so the mediocre feels magical. Your standards lower, your tolerance expands, and they call it gratitude. But it's not gratitude. It's survival. You learn to settle for less because they showed you worse first. The trick isn't in what they offer, it's in what they offer before that. The IKEA effect. You treasure what you've built, even if it's broken. The IKEA effect isn't about love, it's about labor. The more effort you invest, the more valuable something feels. Not because it's better, but because it's yours. And that's how they trap you. They make you work for their approval, work for the relationship, work for the smallest gestures of kindness. And once you've built it, you won't want to let go, even if it's crooked, even if it hurts, even if it's made of splinters. You justify the pain because you earned it. You protect the dysfunction because you shaped it. They let you carry the weight, then hand you the reward with a string of exhaustion wrapped around it. You end up attached to effort, not happiness, because walking away would mean all that work was for nothing. So you stay. You keep assembling. You keep fixing what they keep breaking. Not realizing you're not in love with them. You're in love with the time you've wasted. The decoy effect. They don't sell you the best option. They sell you the one that looks best in comparison. The decoy effect hides behind choice. It whispers, "You picked this yourself," but it already stacked the deck. You're offered 3 options. One is overpriced. One is underwhelming. One feels just right. But that right choice, it was engineered to stand out. They created the decoy to guide your eyes, to steer your gut, to funnel you toward what they wanted. And it works. Not through pressure, but through illusion, because it feels like freedom, even though it's a trap dressed in variety. You think you escaped manipulation because you weren't forced, but you were nudged. Subtly, repeatedly, flawlessly. And the more choices they give, the more control they have, as long as they control the context. The placebo effect. Sometimes belief heals you, and sometimes it deceives you. The placebo effect isn't about medicine. It's about expectation. You believe something will help, and your body responds. You believe something works, and it does, not because it's real, but because your mind made it so. Now imagine that power in the wrong hands. They convince you their love is healing, that their control is protection, that their cruelty is correction, and your mind believes. You feel better when they're near, not because they soothe you, but because you've been trained to expect comfort from chaos. You stop questioning. You stop doubting. You start feeling better, but not because you're safe, because they told you you were. You stay in pain because they promise it's part of your progress. You ignore red flags because they told you this was normal. It's not medicine, it's manipulation, and your body responds because your mind surrendered first. Loss aversion. You'll fight harder to avoid losing than you ever will to gain. That's the quiet force behind loss aversion, the fear of having something and then watching it slip away. They know this, and they use it. They give you affection, then withdraw it. Give you access, then deny it. Give you hope, then threaten to take it back. And you panic. Because now it's not about desire, it's about preservation. You chase not because you want more, but because you're terrified of less. They train you to cling to crumbs because once you had a loaf. They condition you to chase the high because once they made you feel whole. You don't see them clearly anymore. You see them as the gatekeeper to what you fear losing. They become the source of scarcity and the only cure. And so you stay. Not for love, not for peace, but because walking away feels like setting yourself on fire. Power of touch. Sometimes they don't speak. They just reach for your hand. Touch is ancient, primitive, felt before it's understood, and that's what makes it dangerous. A hand on your back, a brush on your arm, a lingering hug. It says, "I'm here." Even when everything else says, "I'm hurting you." This is the power of touch, used not to comfort, but to confuse. They'll raise their voice, then stroke your hair. They'll ignore your feelings, then pull you close. They'll say nothing, but their hand will say, "Don't go." And your body believes it, even when your mind doesn't. Because touch bypasses logic. It dives straight into memory, into safety, into craving. You start to measure their care by proximity, not respect. You confuse presence for love, warmth for truth, and you forgive what they said because of what they touched. But not every hand that holds you has good intentions. Some just want to keep you soft, so you won't fight back. The foot in the mouth effect. They say something awkward, embarrassing, a little too personal, and then you open up. That's the foot in the mouth effect. The paradox of vulnerability. That isn't yours, but theirs. They reveal a small weakness, a misstep, a joke at their own expense. And you feel closer, safer, like the wall between you just cracked a little. But it's not honesty, it's strategy. Because once they've lowered themselves, you feel pressure to rise, to be kind, understanding, open. You return their vulnerability with your own. And now they know what matters to you. They map your fears. They chart your guilt. They make a home inside your empathy, all because they messed up. But it was never about their mistake. It was about your response. Because when you see someone as flawed, you stop seeing them as dangerous. And that's when the real manipulation begins. The endowment effect. You overvalue what you own, even when it's broken. That's the grip of the endowment effect. The illusion that something is more precious just because it's yours. A mug, a memory, a mistake you've made a home in. They use this against you. They make you feel like the relationship is an investment, that every argument you've endured has made it more meaningful, that every sacrifice was a stitch holding it all together. And so you defend it, not because it's good, but because it's yours. You don't want to start over. You don't want to lose what you built. You tell yourself it has value because you've poured so much of yourself into it. But sometimes the cost is the lie. Sometimes your attachment is just exhaustion wearing the mask of love. They let you carry it long enough that you can't imagine setting it down. But clinging to something harmful just because it's yours isn't loyalty. It's self-abandonment. Mind control. They don't need to chain you, they just need to convince you that you're not chained at all. Mind control doesn't always look like science fiction. No blinking machines, no wires in the skull. Just ideas, dripped in slowly until your own thoughts no longer feel like yours. It begins with isolation, repetition. Rewards when you conform, punishment when you resist. They replace your language with theirs, your values with theirs, your voice with silence. And it works because it feels like you made the choice. You begin to obey before you're even asked. You adopt their logic. You mirror their morality. You lose the ability to disagree without guilt. And the worst part? You defend them. You protect the ones who rewrote your reality. Because now their control feels like comfort. You weren't forced. You were rewired. Power of playing dumb. They heard you. They understood. They just pretended they didn't. The power of playing dumb is not about ignorance, it's about control. They act like they didn't notice your tone, like they forgot what they said, like they didn't know it would hurt you. And you start explaining, over-explaining, softening your words, making excuses for them, doing the emotional labor they were always capable of doing themselves. They use feigned cluelessness to dodge responsibility, to buy time, to make you question if you're asking too much. They're just bad at communication. They didn't realize it was that serious. They meant well, but it's a performance, a strategy to stay in power while looking powerless. Because once you believe they don't get it, you let them off the hook. Again and again and again, until you're carrying both your pain and the burden of pretending they didn't cause it. You've just drifted through 50 shadows of the human mind, not fiction, but fragments of the world we live in, spoken softly so you could sleep, and maybe see it clearer when you wake. Some of these truths hurt. Some live closer than you thought. But awareness is the first form of freedom, even if it whispers while you dream. If this helped you rest, or helped you realize, let it echo, share it, save it. And when the darkness feels loud again, come back. We'll be here, quiet, unfolding. This is Drift Mind,